Super Mario is a series famous for its attractive characters. Waluigi, Dry Bowser, Birdo. I could go on. However, I wanted to look into this phenomenon and finally put my studies in psychology to good use. To use. So I gathered a list of over 150 of the Mario series' finest specimens and 6 of my most easily convinced friends, and ran a psychology experiment to not only find the most smashable Mario enemy, but also answer the question of why. Why are they attractive? Why did my friends agree to this? Why did Dad leave? All that and more in the Super Smash or Pass experiment. After sending out a questionnaire and atoning for my sins, I was tasked with establishing the trends and patterns that make an enemy smashable, beginning, naturally, with segregation. So I sat and worked out which of these categories each enemy falls into, striving to answer the generational question, what the fuck is a Burbo? Following some questionable decision making, I whittled it down to this list of materials and species, because some Mario enemies are made of metal, clouds or fire, while some are made of flesh
and blood and organic matter.
But either way, they need to be sorted, and sorted they were. And if you disagree with any of the placements, please consider getting some fresh air or going for a nice walk instead. After sorting them into species, my next step was to identify the most notable feature of each entrant. Nose? Lips? Feet? I once again reviewed the entire list and decided what stood out most on all of our eligible bachelors and bachelorettes. I used to have potential, you know. Next up, an easy one, colour. I tried not to think too much about the implications of sorting creatures into race and colour, and once again went through the entire list, each time being reminded of some of the more forgettable abominations I decided to ask my friends if they'd... Last but not least, I decided to add the console of origin of each enemy, because clearly I hadn't given myself enough work. Arcade to Switch, which was the biggest hunk factory? You'll soon see. And so, with several hours wasted and everything all in order, let's review our results, show some trends, and definitively answer that question. Leave a comment below with your guess before we get going. It will be hilarious seeing what comes to mind when I say, sexy Mario enemy. Done? Let's get analysing. By the way, this is sorted by average smashes per entrant, the sample sizes are all over the place, and this does not pass any tests as good or reliable. Enjoy. Let's start with species, working from the bottom and up to the top, the least sexy way of doing it. This is also our biggest list of groups because nature is diverse and varied, and I decided using the 20Q method of categorizing just wouldn't ruin my life enough, and therefore skipped it. Rounding out the bottom, we have ice and plant, an unsurprising pair to be sure, but in a series without Poison Ivy and Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians, it was bound to happen. Beating those out by just 0.11 higher average smashes is insect, another category with not the best lineup, and hardly what leaps to mind when you picture something to roll in the hay with. Maybe some soil or my drink in the summer would be better suited for these guys. Another 0.11 higher, we find mammal. You know, what we are. That being said, there are very few humanoids here, which both makes the low score make sense, but also makes me question why there were any smashes at all. Just short of the top 10 is rock. Normally being rock hard in this context would be presumably a plus, but it seems our reps are no Dwayne Johnson. If only they'd put in the work and put in the hours, maybe they'd hit 10th place. Speaking of 10th place, fire takes that spot, and while I can't think of a single hot pun to save my life, it is interesting to find that third degree burns are indeed sexier than insects. Our final category below an average of 2 smashes per entrant is birds, another animalistic category ranking a little too high for my liking, but I suppose when there are no chicks available, the chickens will suffice. At an exact average of 2 smashes per enemy is... what the fuck? A category created out of necessity, as not only are these impossible to define, but equally impossible to determine how one would even smash, let alone who or why. Mario isn't the Nintendo series known for its sexy fish, but apparently they're just good enough to land them a comfy 7th. Barely beaten out by Metal with a 0.06 higher average, which as long as they're body safe, I say you do whatever you want with that bullet bill. And with either end. We're into the top 5 now, and we kick it off with Goomba, which I can only assume is due to their physical resemblances. But not to be beaten, the aptly named Bone category takes 4th, and all I can say is, I hope they brought lubricant. Half of these guys have dry in their name. Now usually for me, after a bone comes a ghosting, and the same can be said here with Ghost taking 3rd place. And I gotta say, when the majority of them can't even make eye contact, colour me surprised. Our runner-up is Reptile, which astounds me because Bowser wasn't even an option. But the top spot goes to Cloud, a perfect companion to wrestle in the sheets with. Just don't get them mixed up with the pillows. Though admittedly there were only 3 in this category, so maybe I just made some very attractive picks. But what, perchance, made them so attractive? Well, without a personality to speak of, it must be purely surface level and shallow. Their features! This is actually our smallest set of variables at just 7, whiplash from the last category for sure, but it means we can take a closer look at the reasoning. So, same as before, let's start with the worst. Unsurprisingly, last place goes to Spikes, despite having a whole enemy named after them, which doesn't even have spikes. They're used to rejection, they can handle it. Also, to most, an active safety hazard? Not sexy. Despite the alarmingly high placement of birds, next we find Wings, which I suppose short of danger, complete uselessness in the bedroom would make it fall out of favour for most. And yes, there were non-birds in here, mostly the para variant of the common faces, so maybe it's better if they just be themselves. 5th place goes to Eyes, a feature often noted as attractive in people like these, I suppose. But when that's all you have to offer, it's hard to convert sight into Smash, especially when that's literally all you have to offer. Another surprising one, just missing the podium, we find Hands, which you'd expect to be a useful tool in swaying our subjects, but when your options are constantly balled fists, or the grabbiest of little mitts, as Pink once said, it's just you and your hand tonight. The bronze medal by a large margin goes to Mouth. If there's one thing I've noticed, the art style of Mario loves giving things weirdly kissy lips, including an entirely kissy lips based enemy. Even when said lips hide a huge mouth of sharp teeth, many of our entrants were not scared away. I will be questioning them intensely as to why. Just scraping second is accessories. Clothes, weapons, and any sort of constant in the design that isn't a body part landed them here. And apparently for the better. Just shows how far the right attire and equipment can go for you in this field, even if I'd hardly call a Hammer Bros outfit lingerie. Which brings us to our winner, which to my dismay is Tail. While I have a mountain of questions for these people, I will elect for my sanity to not ask them. Like Wings, there were plenty of just another enemy with a tail in this category, and it seemed to give them bonus points. Just gotta be careful not to hit P-speed in the act. Nobody likes finishing fast. And so, with my worldview permanently tainted, let's do a quick one, the colours. I'm not going to infer much here, and just try and inject some colour theory to see if there's any correlation. Outside of the top 5 in ascending order, we find orange, grey, purple, blue, green and brown, which, from 5 seconds of googling, appear to symbolise confidence, calm, reliable, royalty, fertility and warmth. Maybe colour symbolism just gives anything a positive meaning, but all of these seem pretty favourable. I mean, fertility? I think this study single-handedly proves colour theory as nonsense. I expect to be published in the papers at dawn. Let's look a bit further into the top 5, starting with red, the colour of passion and energy, which I'd think would land at number 1, but clearly took it far enough. Maybe its ties to danger held it back. 4th, we get yellow, tied to joy and optimism, which don't immediately jump to mind as smashable traits, but maybe it was meant more as a friendly smash, a bro smash if you will. The bottom of the top, number 3, is black, which appears to symbolise power and evil, which when I hear how these people talk about Lady Dimitrescu, yeah, that tracks. It also symbolises death though. Sorry Spikes, I'm sure it was nothing personal. The yang to its yin, white takes second, emblematic of simplicity and cleanliness, making me think less of smashing and more of Kingdom Hearts. And finally, number 1, quite logically, being pink. Romance, compassion, femininity. All things that spring to mind when I think of Clampy. Well earned, Pink. This entire category was a sham anyway. Last but not least, a person's past can greatly impact their smashability, so where these entrants come from, their console of origin, will round out our ranking before the big reveal of the finest specimens a franchise has to offer. A nice round 10 of them from the arcades of the 80s to present day. Let's observe. Fittingly kicking us off, the arcade cabinets were not able to provide the finest options with 2 entrants and only 1 smash of a possible 12. Ruthless. A big generational jump takes us to the N64 and 9th, with the revolutionary platformer unable to offer the best options. Looks like Sonic wasn't the only one with a difficult jump to 3D. Often the reject, next we find the Wii U, one of the bigger groups of the bunch, making the low average all the more devastating. I suppose the lack of notoriety of NSMBU and 3D World extended to the singles in their area. Joining its underselling brother is the GameCube. Evidently the summary setting wasn't enough to get anyone hot under the collar enough for this group. You can also make your own squirting joke at your leisure, but I shall rise above. With a 0.01 higher average, reflecting the change in processing power in this upgrade, next up is the Wii, the largest sample group of them all with 3 games to pull from, but to what avail? Would have been different if we were doing friendly characters too, let me tell you that. I mean, just look at Lubba. Whew. Staying close in the timeline, we come to the DS. The uniqueness of the first entry in the white bread of Mario series games wasn't quite enough to hit the medals, but taking the top 5 is nothing to be ashamed of. Staying portable but losing a screen gives us the Switch. When the whole thing is getting inside enemies, maybe we were all just too used to it. You do encounter all of these enemies before marriage too, so maybe that plays a factor. Who's to say? Jumping way back to our 3rd place spot, we get the SNES. Revered then and now, though likely for very different reasons. This was the birthplace of many of the most iconic and familiar faces in the series, so they've had plenty of time to establish their reputations and earn this spot. Not to go down without a fight though, as everything post-2017 proved, the 3DS lands silver, overcoming its middling quality games, likely with the power of Tails. Awful. But it's the classic that takes the top spot. The NES is where it all really began, and gave us so many of the series classics that it was basically a given. 1 iconic game would have been enough, so 3 teaming with eligible bachelors was a shoo-in impossible to rival. And with that, you've waited long enough. I know you've been asking, who individually was the best of the best? Well, I'll tell you. Before you are the entrants who got 1 to 4 smashes, again out of a possible 6, and I'll go into more details of who managed to get the illustrious 5, and even a full 6 out of 6. Last chances to guess? Let's take a look. There were 20 lucky entrants who landed a 5 out of 6, and I'll group them together to save on time, but let's take a look at them and see if we can see why. A spectral start, the Boo, Gold Boo, Boohemoth, and yes, Tail Boo, all made the cut. Hailing from high-placing consoles, being members of the Ghost category which also performed handsomely, being high-ranked colours and their iconic mouths set these spooky suitors up from the start for a smooth success. Just, again, be sure not to look them in the eye or they may freeze up in the moment. Now to the artillery. Banzai Bill, King Bill, and of course, Tail Bullet Bill and Cat Banzai Bill also made a high grade, with the default nowhere to be found. I suppose when there's a whole variety of self-help tools named after you, this is really your natural wheelhouse. While Metal didn't place astoundingly, their colour and features did them a world of help, even if the tail thing does still worry me. Members of the winning accessories group, Magikoopa, Sniffit and Shy Guy, take their attire and retro origins to the runner-up spot too, and fellow old-timers of the Blooper, Sledge Bro and Cheep Cheep also wiggle their way in, having helpful attributes across the board and thankfully not a tail in sight, if you don't count that one. Rattling off the final few, Foo's cloudy complexion won hearts over, Gold Chomp dazzled its way to the top, the mouthy Block Stepper and Cheap Chomp left jaws agape, and the Bone Goomba is here! Leaving the final and easily most questionable runner-up, the T-Rex. The odds were stacked against it for most of our variables and the fact that it's a fucking dinosaur, but that may have just been its trump card thanks to the reptile group's high placement. Congrats to our silver medalists, but there is one step higher we can go. The best of the best. The gold medalists, the super models of Super Mario. There are but 3, and they are as follows. The Deep Cheap. Beating out its red counterpart, this little fish clearly had some hidden X factor which won it the top spot. The angry eyes, the glowing green, the word deep in its name. I'm not sure if even the subjects know, but all I'm sure of is it's our first winner. Next up, the Octoboo, overcoming the Wii's negative reception and using its ghostly white mouth to win over all 6 of the Smashers and secure a spot above the rest. A truly out-of-this-world performance. And finally, and most strangely, Stareface Ogre rounds out our tantalizing triad. Regardless of its stony complexion and its 8th generation game of origin, that red face and furious mouth made it impossible for onlookers to not have a crush on it. And so, there you have it. The definitive, finest enemies the Mario series can offer. Out of curiosity, I thought I'd see if I could find one that matched all the top attributes. A pink Cloud with a tail from the NES, and the closest I could come to was Kirby with a Tanuki power-up, so do with that what you will. And now I can finally rest. This questionnaire was sent out in September of 2022, so I've been sitting on this for a while. I hope there hasn't been time for a new game to come out with a whole new array of new and unique enemies, completely outdating this whole project. That would be... Oh! And there you have that. Thank you very much for watching this far. I know it's a bit of an odd concept and it means the world that you've stuck around this long. I'm very open to doing some sort of sequel, maybe with subs or Discord members, who knows? So stick around for if I ever do that. Speaking of the Discord, join in. There's a link in the description if I have remembered right. Be sure to do all the usual YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, the bell, share it, tell your dad about that video that you just watched. Confess that you watched that. I suppose with that, have a good rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next one. And happy holidays if you're watching this when it comes out. And if you're not, the fuck?